Welcome everyone to this session. I hope you enjoyed the event so far this morning. The roundtable seemed very interesting. So this session is going to be a panel about AI in advanced manufacturing. And along with me on this panel, I have Laura Murdoch as well as Mark Mabry. So I just want to take a brief moment to introduce both of them. Also introduce myself. So I'm basically, if you know Lila at the Stanley Black & Decker program, I'm Lila in the Montreal AI program. So I run the Techstars Montreal AI. I've been doing this. We've run 3 classes now. Applications are open for the fourth cohort happening in the fall. So AI is something that I've spent a lot of time in meeting many startups in the past, not just in manufacturing, but in many industries. And I'm excited to have 2 panelists with me that have equal interest and experience around AI and a lot more extensive experience around manufacturing than I can claim. So Laura is Vice President and GM for AI Software New Ventures at Park, which is a Xerox company. So she's responsible for creating high-value new software ventures that leverage all these unique AI and AR technologies that Park develops. Mark Mabry is the CTO of Stanley Black & Decker, and he's been at Stanley Black & Decker for more than 3 years now. Previously had roles, again, in intelligence portfolio, in science, applied science at the US Air Force and MITRE Corporation. So welcome to both of you. So for the duration of this panel, what we'll do is we'll let each panelist introduce a little bit about themselves, and then we'll move on to more informal discussions. I would like to bring your attention to the right side of this. You have both event and stage chat. Make sure that if you have questions, comments about what we're discussing, you do so in the stage chat so that this is really about what we're discussing on this stage rather than the full event. So that being said, Mark, while we were preparing for this panel, you shared a white paper that you authored recently called Towers, a Roadmap for AI-Enabled Manufacturing. And I would love to have us to share an overview of how you came about writing this and some of the findings that you came and talked about in this white paper.
Well, Bruno, first of all, thanks very much for bringing attention to AI in manufacturing. It's a real honor and pleasure to be with you and Laura. By the way, particularly on International Women's Day, which was yesterday, which we celebrated, and one of our themes is to improve the diversity in manufacturing. I'm delighted to have both 2 sons and a daughter who are both, all excited by technology and AI. Actually, all 3 of my kids have built neural networks, which is kind of interesting, something I wouldn't have expected, had you asked me 20 years ago. Exactly. But to answer your question, really the motivation was the fact that, several organizations, McKinsey and others, we work with Price Waterhouse, with Boston Consultancy Group, all of them had identified, and even way back, if you look at the German government, had identified, quite a few years ago, the value in manufacturing, in particularly the intersection with AI. McKinsey's assesses it to be a $3.9 trillion economic opportunity, $11 trillion a year by 2025. So there's some big economic opportunities. But let's get to your question about the if you will, the white paper or the roadmap. That was really born out of, I'm a fellow of the Association for the Advancement of AI. I've been working in AI for, I hate to admit it, 40 years. Certainly really actively for about the past 3 decades. And one of the things we do regularly is we pull together communities of interest to articulate the future. And so in Stanford, actually in the midst of COVID, the event was canceled, but we decided we were going to press on with a virtual event. We did it in Zoom. It was the first meeting actually I hosted in Zoom. It was a brand new tool, basically a year ago. And it was fantastic. We had people all across the US. We had people from the US government. We had people from academia. We had people from industry. We had an individual from Jamaica. I mean, it was really an exciting event where we we had people give papers like they would normally do at a symposium. These are spring and fall symposiums that we do with the international community. And importantly, we focused on what did we need, what were the roadblocks in AI to get AI to our vision of manufacturing, and what was our vision of manufacturing. And I appreciate Lila Partridge has indicated the reference, so if anyone's interested, they can read the white paper and access the full website. All the materials are there, the presentations and so on. And the short story is there are some important capabilities in modeling, in sensors, basically to get us up the road toward better models, digital models of work processes, of machines, of factories, of people, so that we get much more deeper models and prescriptive analytics as we move towards a more digital world. In addition, there are new capabilities, particularly in robotics and automation of processes, where limitations in vision and dexterity need to be overcome. And then finally, there's the human aspect to it, the economic aspect to it. How do we move towards more symbiotic systems? And I even, as a practitioner of AI, I oftentimes don't like to say I work in artificial intelligence. I like to say I work in augmented intelligence, trying to uplift people. And so that's sort of a description of the event. And hopefully the work is valuable to folks. It's a 10-year plan, lots of opportunities we've identified there, but lots more work in exciting growth for all.
Interesting. And reading it, there's a lot of opportunities that you present for AI, and then you move on to challenges. I was curious to see how much of that is, do you think, like generally applicable to manufacturing, or how much does it tie or relate to trends you see at Stanley Black & Decker more precisely?
Well, at Stanley Black & Decker, we've been on this journey in the Industrial Revolution, frankly, through all of them, all four, because we're 178 years old. So we've experienced all, and interestingly, you see a physical, not a virtual backdrop. But if I were in my work office today, because we're obviously remote working for safety, you would actually see a factory of the future behind me. And that would include, how we deal with automation in receipt of materials, how we do automation in material handling, machining, assembly, actually packaging. So at Stanley Black & Decker, we've specifically focused on a few areas what we think are the highest value targets. We work carefully, we think very, very carefully about how to do this. We pre-position things in our factory of the future, and we work closely with the 140 factories around the world that are very, very, different and heterogeneous, but we try to come up with common solutions that can be deployed at scale. And they, we can talk more about some of those applications in mobile robotics and automation, but all of them, importantly, we don't try to do everything. And one final point is we try to do things in partnership with others. We are not robot makers, but we are robot appliers, right? We aren't IoT device makers, but we apply IoT at scale. And that's, I think, one of the key elements of our strategy.
It's amazing to see a company with such a long history of building things, and I assume many production lines that are like extremely old.
I've seen forgers that were built in 1930s, right?
Yeah. So this openness and that will be like further in this panel, how we talk about how you bring AI and such innovation into so historical functions like this, which brings me to you, Laura. I'd like to know, like, Xerox Park on the up that doesn't have this 150 plus years of building, but how do you work? How is Xerox and Park organized to bring those innovation that are in the labs around AI and ML and to turn them into solutions to the market, especially in the manufacturing and industrial space?
Right. Well, Xerox isn't quite as old as Stanley Black & Decker, but it's no spring chicken. It's 100 years old.
Yeah, fair point.
So what's super interesting about Park is Palo Alto Research Center is because Mark, I can probably compete with you for how long I've been in and around AI also, but Park has been around. I haven't been at Park. I've only been at Park for just under 3 years, but Park has been doing AI for decades. And has decades of expertise and lots and lots of depth and breadth, as well as in materials and in sensors and in bringing those things together and in human-centered design before it was cool. So Park has a rich history there. And what's super interesting for me at Park is that Park has it's a wholly owned subsidiary of Xerox. So many of the projects that we work on are tuned for this sort of mature, very successful printing business, which also is a manufacturing business and a services business as well. But Park has a fascinating hybrid model of research, which is that about half of the research that's done at Park is done for outside entities. For Department of Energy's Advanced Research Program, for DARPA, which Mark, maybe why you know some of the people at Park from your government days. We do work for commercial companies like Panasonic, GE, P&G, who may have research organizations that specialize in other areas, but they come to Park to enhance what they can do. And what that allows us to do is have an incredible breadth of research in particular in AI and the applications of AI across a lot of different kinds of industries. So we have I was just sort of to make sure that I could be up to speed for this, representing some of the range that we do. I was chatting with some of our researchers and some of the areas that are relevant for manufacturing, and it includes work that we're doing in generative design to do part count reduction, which is a big opportunity area. We do a lot of work in 3D printing, and particularly metal printing, which is much more, which opens up a brand new field for manufacturers. We do work in smart factory. It's like, how do you preemptively reconfigure your lines? Because everybody's got redundancy built in, but the question is, how do you optimize, when you have to make shifts or, do maintenance or whatever? So we have work in the smart factory so that the factory's never down, and in predictive maintenance as well in that area. In fact, we are just we're in the process of spinning up a startup that is going to do just predictive maintenance, which is pretty exciting. We do work in robotics, new materials discovery, and an area where I've gotten a lot more involved recently is in knowledge transfer and the idea of taking all that information that's currently mostly in text form, in manuals, service call records, things like that, and trying to create personalized visual instructions and task planning to help address. I know one of the earlier panel discussions I was listening to was talking a lot about the skills gap. And that's a huge issue, and one with where a lot of the technologies are just now coming together to really create interesting solutions around personalizing instructions, giving somebody, visual information instead of them having to find in the manual what they're supposed to do. Xerox just acquired an augmented reality startup that is going to help us kind of pull some more pieces together so that we can use augmented reality to provide really rich instructions on demand to help workers on a factory floor figure out, how do I do this predictive maintenance, or oops, haven't seen this problem before, now what do I do? Yep. So exciting, all of the opportunities. So anyway.
Very interesting. You were mentioning work instructions. My biggest exposure to manufacturing was working with a startup in Quebec City doing exactly that, work instructions through iPads, and how the switch from written to videos was interesting.
I have kids too, Mark, and I bet you your kids will not sit there and read a manual.
No.
Most of us never did either.
The YouTube way of learning and discovering. Thanks for these points. I think both of you mentioned, Laura especially, you mentioned a lot of areas where AI can be applied. The first topic that I want to have a discussion on, and I'll remind the audience in the stage chat, there is time at the end of this panel where we can bring discussions, questions from you. So please do not hesitate to post them in the stage chat. I'd like to move from like conceptual areas to specific projects. Can you think
That's always the hard part.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about the last like few years where you applied AI and ML, are there one or two projects that come to mind that were either like a big win or a big miss, and what you learned from that? Like Mark, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. What was, as I mentioned before, we have focused specifically on those places where we thought we would get the most value. And this is I know there's a bunch of startups out there, and that would be my encouragement is
Yeah.
Go where the gold is, right?
Mm.
And where's the gold? Well, the gold are in things like productivity, the scrap reduction, efficiencies, fulfillment, right? These are places where just moving the needle a little bit can save a huge amount of money. So what do? Well, the first thing we do is we go in and we connect our factories, just make sure they've got IT. One of the just heard a deputy director of the FBI speak. The number 2 most attacked institution, I think it might have been after hospitals or governments, were manufacturers last year.
Mm.
So making sure that's secure, right? You got to do all of the basic sort of protections, and partly that's because of the explosion of Industry 4.0, right? We've got IoT devices, networks everywhere, right? So it's really easy for people to have poor configuration or have backdoors, not really anticipated. But the point is getting things connected, if you want to be in the digital world, is really critical. Immediately then you begin to get some efficiencies, like awareness, right? You just get effects that people realize, oh my goodness, I'm spending that much money on energy. I have that much scrap. My people are sitting around for this period of time, and they're frustrated because they're not meeting their quota, and you're frustrated because you're wasting money. And so maybe we could figure that out. So the digital dashboard, we have a common dashboard that you walk into any of our new factories and you see our what we call live view. And along that way, we create a little. This is really Sudhi Bangalore, my colleague, who's the chief technology officer of our operations. He and I work very closely together. His office is literally next to mine, and he came and joined the company at the same time. So that's kind of him and his whole teams together with our industrial leaders, and that partnership's really important. So that's one big application. A second nice application are cooperative robots. And what do they do? Well, we've had tremendous advances by Tulip and Ready Robotics and others, where literally these robots are now today, not only do they have an embedded open, robotic operating system, but they also have capabilities that make them learn much easier. Like literally you can pick their hands up and say, move over here, pick this object up, move it over here, and then release it. And so that kind of kinesthetic interface really allows you to unlock the performance of the operators. And so we've got 130 cobots in the last couple of years we've deployed, right? Just because they're really safe, they're effective, and so on. And then the third area is, and again, this partly goes to, it depends on what environment you're in. Are you in a green field? We built a brand new factory where we digitally designed it and digitally operated it in Texas, the new Craftsman plant that brought Craftsman back to America to produce it here. It's a fully automated sort of new place. But then there are older factories. And so one of our big use cases is just making the people in those factories that exist more efficient, which includes moving stuff. So mobile robots, not fixed cooperative robots, sort of doing inspection or doing maybe tending to a machine, so you get people's hands out of the way of dull, dirty, dangerous activities, but you just stop them from moving material so that they can become more efficient. Truck comes in warehouse. We have distribution centers that are as big as Amazon warehouses, 1 million square feet. Right, they're big as an Amazon fulfillment center. And so guess what? We've got lots of tools that we've got to move around to get them to people who want them in their homes. And so you've got to move those things. Trucks come in, trucks go out. How do you move that material efficiently? So those are a couple of the use cases. Why do we focus on those? 20% efficiency in terms of savings in using mobile robots, safer conditions, more efficient throughput. In terms of the manufacturing processes, and just better awareness, right? If you want to win, we talk about winning the hour, right? Not just winning the day, not winning the quarter, but winning the hour. How are you going to do that? You're going to do that by better intelligence, both robotic and human. And so we really take a holistic approach, focusing really on a few key areas where we can extract significant value.
Interesting. Laura, I'm curious to hear some examples or learnings from Park.
Well, I just want to pick up on where Mark left off there, which is focusing on a handful of places where you know that that's where the gold is. I think one of the things that I see is being in the space, and I'm more on the business side, but I've always been in and around AI and tech, and that what I see is in most companies there is this perennial gap between the business need, like what the kinds of things that Mark could articulate that were business problems around productivity, and the technical know-how to put a solution together. It just feels like the more things change, the more they stay the same in terms of that gap. And you have business people who are like, I've heard I need AI, but they don't really understand what it is, what it can do, what it can't do, what you need to make it work. And then you have the technologists who tend to be like, I have a technology, where's the problem? And they don't know how to put those things together. And so like one of the things that and this is one of the things that I try to do in my own corporation, and also coach, I do a lot of mentoring of startups. It's just how I'm involved with this program as well. But one of the things that I always try to encourage the people to think about is like, start with where the business problem is, not with what technology you have. I mean, obviously there's this subtle dance that has to happen, an interplay of, wow, the technology has evolved so it can do more things. But what it always comes down to is I have to be able to solve a problem. And the person who has the problem doesn't really care about the technology. They just want it to work. And so I think startups and technology solution builders anyway have to always really come back to a really clear identification of the problem they're solving. And here's the trick, I think, for a lot of startups is for whom. Really understanding who in the organization has that problem. And can I solve the problem that person has uniquely well for them and bring the technologies to that person? And I think that's doing that one thing well, finding who you can solve that problem for, identifying it, to me, has been the secret for success for any of the pilot projects and that, or startup efforts that I've seen work. And that's really non-trivial to figure that out, especially
I think those comments are how people in tech tend to like focus on the tech and how it's obviously
it is cool,
I'm an engineer myself. Like I like tech.
We all love it.
Exactly. So I think you're bringing us to an important point, and that was a challenge Mark identified in your white paper around value articulation. And the inability to clearly articulate the benefits reduces the executive support on one end, and also the employee commitment on the other end to deploying AI. So I'm curious to, like, Laura, this is something I'm sure at Park you have a lot of experience on in your past before advising companies. Like how, like people in the audience who either lead inside corporations, who lead AI projects, or startups that are trying to sell their tech, how do they go about this challenge? Like, do they focus on the problem as you suggested? Do they focus on the value? How should they approach talking to someone like Mark about the possibility of what they're selling?
Well, one of the things that I observe about most startups is they tend to have like a single pitch, and they really need to think about putting themselves in the position of the audience, like, and understanding. I mean, classic sort of empathy thing, right? You got to really flip it around, put yourself in the position of the business that you're trying to sell to, and think about how are they looking at the problem. And any enterprise, and I'm sure any manufacturing company of any age at all, is going to have lots of different interested parties. And you're a startup and you can only do one thing well, right? So you have to zero in on who your beneficiary is, who's got the problem. But the buyer sometimes doesn't equal the beneficiary. And therein lies a problem because then what you have to do is you have to be able to have a different pitch for different people inside the organization. So if you're lucky enough to work with a Stanley Black & Decker, which has a very progressive technology office, you've obviously got to have a pitch that works for Mark, right? And Mark can help make the bridge to the rest of the executives because he knows how to translate. He knows how to make the business case for it. He's already identified where the big business problems are. But to be successful on the ground, you've also got to be able to have a pitch that works for the person that actually has the problem, right? So you've got to actually solve that person's problem, or you're just, I mean, stuff that's just pushed from the top down. Yeah, I know this personally from internally. It's just such a battle.
Buy-in must come from both angles. That's right.
You've got to be able to do both, right?
Yeah. And
then at the same time, I think a startup, an entrepreneur needs to think about solving a specific problem for the beneficiary inside the enterprise, right? And they have to, at the end of the day, they have to do that well. Yep. They've also got to solve a problem. They've got to make sure that's connected to a larger business problem. So at the executive level, they get that kind of sponsorship and support and ability to connect the dots, because enterprises are complex things and there'll be pieces of the solution that are in different organizations, right? Absolutely. But then they have to have a different pitch to their investors, because the investors are looking at the business model and the big vision and stuff. And I see a lot of startups try to have one size fits all. They try to have one pitch deck that works for the investor and the executive and the beneficiary. And you're like, no, don't try. You really have to understand your which person you're selling to at the moment or pitching to, and what do they care about? Because it's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah, and
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, Bruno. So I agree with everything Laura has said. Very, very good, great advice for the startups out there. I think a couple of things. One is, to your earlier point, fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. Mm-hmm. Become a master of the problem. So Lila just asked in the Lila Partridge asked, where can you go for Industry 4.0? McKinsey's got some great white papers. The World Economic Forum, fantastic white papers, including use cases, including economics, including the scale of the problem you're going to solve. So interestingly, we are both investors and we're manufacturers, and we maintain a global supply chain, and we have to deal with customers, B2C, B2B. So we kind of got it all. That's frankly the reason I came to the company. So my advice to some of the startups would be eternally curious and be agile. We have so many examples. We had a company, a wonderful company we're working with, Techstars company, where we've spun up Accelerator called Dynamic Green Products. The president has intentionally pivoted his company several times, right? He's got kind of a palette of technology. In his case, they're biology-based lubricants, which are completely environmentally friendly, very disruptive to the petrochemical market, and extremely attractive to potential green consumers. And by the way, a company that's committed to being plastics packaging free by 2025, which is coming up quick, and we're making huge progress. And by the way, carbon neutral by 2030. Those are big targets. So if you can come along and help us accelerate to those targets, you're going to be a champion. And so I think it's importantly falling in love with the problems that are either perennial, they're always going to be around with it. We're always going to have productivity problems. We are always going to have people challenges, right? Training and upskilling. We're always going to have supply chain resilience problems. Maybe it's a pandemic this year. Maybe it's inflation next year. Maybe it strikes or some world strife the following. There are always going to be challenges. If you can solve those problems, to use the great one, Wayne Gretzky, I'm sure you'll appreciate this, Bruno. Right, skate to where the puck's going to be. Yeah. Right? Don't look behind you. Look ahead of you. And we could talk about many examples, lots of great examples, but I think that's my advice.
Okay, I think that this is all great because we're talking about like how do you sell on the value? How do you get a corporation buying into what you have to offer? How do you get these pilots starting? How do you get these projects going? And especially with AI, when there's a lot of excitement about a topic, probably people are going to be a bit more eager to start those pilots. But oftentimes we forget that the pilots need to turn into something real. And there was a term in your white paper, Mark, that I like really stuck on, which was the pilot purgatory. I was curious to hear more about once you won that pilot, you convinced the problem people that this is a potential solution, you sold on the value. What's that pilot purgatory, and how do you avoid getting stuck into it?
Well, it's a great question. By the way, it's not my term. It's a term of art from the field, so I can't claim it. But it's a wonderful term. We use it all the time. And I think one of the, and I'll try to weave in an answer simultaneously to Ross Lawless, one of our former CEOs at Cult Dynamic, asked the question about, what are you most excited about AI to impact? And my answer would be, well, it's kind of the same thing. Focus on the big problem. But solve a portion of it that somehow will fit into the ecosystem. In other words, don't try to solve the whole, take on the big giant yourself. You're going to get crushed by it. And also remain agile. I mean, Ross's company is beautiful, right? They're out developing next generation 3D printing technology. And what does he do? Pandemic hits and he says, hey, I think we can cleverly figure out how to manufacture face shields. And he does it for every county in Ireland. Right, and just takes his manufacturing genius and applies it to a real world need. And so it's a combination of agility, but also picking up that. So he wasn't ever stuck in pilot purgatory. Yep. He was piloting all the time, and then pivoting. Oh, I think I can make the headband a little bit more ergonomic. I think I can actually produce this, maybe not in only traditional 3D printing, but also combined with injection molding. So I think you'll only be stuck in that purgatory if you're thinking too locally or too small, and you're not agile enough. That hopefully that answers the question.
Laura, I'm curious to hear, like at Park, I'm sure there's many things you try out that fail to deliver. Like, is it about setting the right triggers or the right objectives and failing if you put the bar too high, or is there something else?
I think there's something unique about AI, and I love Mark is much deeper on the technology than I am, but one of the things that I've observed, just sort of as on the business side, is that's I think uniquely challenging right now, where with AI and the kind of the level of maturity of the tool sets around it, is that sometimes things will work in one use case and they're not as extensible as you'd like. In other words, that AI tool sets, the machine learning, and I think in particular, I'm thinking about some of these machine learning models. They're not as generalizable as one might like. And so, and I think there was a comment earlier today, and I think it's all too true, which is that there's not as much uniformity across factories or office spaces or anything as you might like if you wanted to readily jump from a pilot to something scalable. Because, ideally, when you pick your pilot, you pick something that is a representative use case, and then you do it once and you replicate. And that is harder, I think, with many of the AI technologies, at least today, than it is with some other kinds of technologies. And at least that's been my observation. And so, it's just picking smart.
Yep.
And this is where the kind of coming together with, okay, we might have 5 high value business problems. Then the technology people come in and say, well, that one's going to work better. Given the state of the technology today, I think this one is a 2-year problem. That one over there might be a 10-year problem. We work on, keep it in the research labs. So that interplay between the technology know-how and the business know-how and bridging that gap is super important. Yeah. And it's non-trivial, I think, in the AI space, at least in my observation. And so I know personally we've learned the hard way that sometimes you can get something to work really nicely in one use case, and then you go to replicate it and you're like, oops, what does that work?
That's something
and what's changed in the data. So you want to be really, almost want to have this meta level going on in your pilots, assuming you can still pick smart and project that you think this is going to be extensible or generalizable. But even then you might get surprised, and then sort of thinking about, okay, did I at least make sure I understood the process that I went through? And maybe it's just the expertise in the process that you start to get good at.
Yes.
And then over time, I think, as with all technologies, there'll be more tool sets that will evolve, more maturity in the technology. There'll be more knowledge out there. And so things will get more generalizable.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a quick add is, take an exemplar like DeepHow. This is a product now that we offer commercially. It actually came out of a Techstars Accelerator, Seams Accelerator, and eventually came into Stanley Black & Decker and Stanley X. Why does DeepHow work well? Because the inventors were clever enough to realize speech and language processing had proceeded to such a level that, basically you're getting speaker independent recognition in multiple languages. Okay, what can we do with that? Well, we've got all of these people. We just talked, earlier on, we were talking about, the new generation of everybody, using videos and how to, nobody reads textbooks anymore, right? They go and they would say, tell me how. Well, in fact, that's what DeepHow does. And it also leverages vision technology. So you take your cell phone, you go image somebody in the kitchen, making a soup, or, maintaining, setting up their machine, or maintaining their machine, or running a factory. It doesn't make a difference what they're doing, right? Capture that recipe, and the AI augments that human, makes them really efficient. So they don't get stuck in pilot purgatory because they've picked a problem, as Laura was describing. The business has a real problem. We're losing the gray-haired folks, right, who are walking out with all their knowledge, right? Or we have fewer, employees, and so we want new ones to get them up to speed really quick. We want to upskill them. It makes us more efficient, and it makes them richer. Right, so that's a good thing for everybody. How do you do that? Well, you do that by leveraging the ecosystem cleverly. And the one final thing I would say is you also have to have a good business model. And whether it be subscription based, or whether it be a way in which you can quickly take advantage of an exponential growth, a platform effect. That kind of, that's another key element. Layla asking, how do you pick smart? Well, pick a universal problem that can scale. Pick a technologies that you can integrate together, maybe add your special sauce together, and then also pick a business model that can scale. Those are a couple of the three magic elements.
Yeah. So there were a few questions. We're almost out of time. It's 12:53, and I see this is a discussion I think could go on for. Like this notion of Mark, you mentioned how Stanley Black & Decker, you want to focus and do things that can have an impact at scale. And Laura, you bring the point that yes, but with AI, machine learning models are not so easily brought from one point to another. So that is like a huge challenge for startups or any project to start of thinking, okay, I need to focus on one specific problem, sell my value. But yes, I need to think about it. How does it impact the company, which sometimes a global company? How do I impact them at scale, which is extremely hard. I want to end with a more exotic question. Like AI is most of the examples we've talked about were core production, like focused on efficiencies or reducing places where there's less efficient production processes. Are there like more exotic examples of how you saw AI in a plan? Is it like around worker safety or like things that you didn't expect AI to have a big influence in manufacturing?
I would say the best is yet to come. And my good friend Peter Heinemann, who's the acting director of DARPA, I was just chatting with him the other day. He talks about and several others do. It's oversimplification, I'll admit, of the world, but the history. But AI we're in the second stage of AI. First stage was expert systems, very highly coded, very very specialized. Now we're in machine learn, but still statistically based and not causal. The next generation are going to be really deep, causal systems that are also going to have creativity. They're going to have emotional awareness. They're going to be much more sophisticated. They're not going to take over the world. You don't have to worry about that. In fact, we have strong evidence that automation generates more wealth and generates more jobs. And I'm happy to, there's a nice long-term study done in Europe recently on that. The point is that new AI is going to allow us to do things we never imagined before. It's an AI that's going to wake up almost like your co-pilot, that we have in the Air Force, automated co-pilot, which says, pull up, pull up, pull up. And we actually have now, we have on board, because of some work we did about 10, 15 years ago, we have systems that guarantee essentially that you will not drive your plane into the ground. That's a nice thing to have. I'd like to know if my plant is starting to get inefficient, if I really should start paying attention to it, right? So I think there's an exciting future for AI.
Laura, curious to hear your thoughts, given all the interesting tech, I'm sure comes out of Park.
Yes, and you just triggered something. I listened to a talk at Stanford just yesterday about skills, and it referenced a study that had been done about why other countries could build great airplanes, but America, kind of during World War II, kind of won that the air battles. Is because we created better pilots, and because we had flight simulation before anyone else did. And I thought that was such a great analogy to what the capabilities are in that I'm this person where I'm working right now that I'm most excited about is this ability to upskill people, to augment the intelligence, not to supplant it, but to allow people to do the things, because this is always been the promise of technology and automation, is to do things better, to do things that humans can't do as well as machinery, right? So, and then free humans up to do the things that we're uniquely skilled to do. And so, whenever I get too excited about the technology, I just remind myself, I'm like, well, okay, so that's really good at that, and I'm really good at this, and that's good, so just being really clear about that separation. Sorry, I don't know if I really answered your question, but that's excited by what Mark was saying.
That's a very nice closing thought on it doesn't matter how good or the tech is, you still need someone to drive it and make it do.
The technology serves us, right? The technology serves us. So
yeah, the plane might be the best plane. If the pilot is not the best pilot, it's not going to win.
Yeah.
Augmented intelligence, not artificial.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great tech word. Yeah.
So I would love to bring another topic, but I don't think we could be able to wrap it up within the 2 minutes we have left. There are some questions that came up in the stage chat, so some appreciation of the discussion. So thanks to both of you, Laura and Mark. I hope people in the audience were able to gain some valuable insight. Doesn't matter if you
asked about, sorry to interrupt, I just clicked to the stage thing. Somebody asked about contact information. Anybody can find me on LinkedIn, or my email is laura.murdoch@parc.com.
Perfect.
You can
same thing for me.
That in the chat, right?
That's right. I was just adding my mine into the chat. So I put my contact information in the chat.
Very nice. And well, we're done. Thanks a lot for participating. If there's any AI entrepreneurs in this field, we're right now sourcing for the next Techstars AI Montreal. So if you've enjoyed what you saw today, what the program does with Stanley and Lila, feel free to ping me. I'll put my email address in the chat as well. I hope you enjoyed it. And I just want to make sure to encourage everyone. There's a networking platform for the summit that has been shared to all people. This site will stay live for the next year, I believe, where there are some companies, some AI startups from this Techstars program and other ones that you can meet, that you can see the pitch of. So please don't forget, once this hop-in event is done, that there's this networking platform that we invite you to go to. So,
thanks for having me. It's really fun.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Shout out to all the 10 new startups in our accelerator.
Yay! It's a great group. I had a chance to meet them. They're wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Laura.